So good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Liz May. I'm the CEO of ShopCare. ShopCare is a health and safety association that covers retail, supply chain, manufacturing and transport. Thank you for coming along today. We're thrilled to be able to welcome Carlos Valdes-Dapena to be with us this morning. Reducing anxiety in the workplace in a world where everything seems to have been turned upside down is a very, very hot topic that people want to know as much as possible about. So we're thrilled to have Carlos with us today. I'll hand over to Jerry Lynch, who, amongst other things, is the chair of ShopCare, who's going to be chatting with Carlos this morning. Thanks, Jerry.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. So I invited Carlos. I've worked for Carlos for many years while at Mars. So Carlos was the other side of the world, although he did come over and help us build a high-performing team at Mars, New Zealand. So I really appreciate that and worked with him very closely. He's an author, and keynote speaker. He's got a couple of books which you might be able to see in the background on his table there. So an expert in high-performing teams. He's done a lot of research in this area, and also consults many global companies around this area. So really pleased to have him here. And what I wanted to talk to him about, I was having a conversation with him around getting back to the office, and I realised there's a lot of anxiety. I've spoken to a number of companies who are struggling to know what to do, and what is the new normal, and how do they operate. So, with the US being a little bit ahead in this area in terms of back to the office, I thought I'd talk to Carlos and see what tips he has. So, welcome, Carlos.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you this morning.
Yes. So the first question I'd ask is really heading back to the office. So the US is obviously been a bit further ahead. And many companies will have been thrown into lockdown, not had a policy for lockdown and just had to deal with it. There was a survey out in New Zealand where 56% of people their anxiety is significantly increased over the last year as a result of the pandemic, and there's also anxiety about going back to work, back to the office. Some people unvaccinated, etc. What can leaders do of companies to reduce some of this anxiety for people?
So the anxiety aspect of it's a tricky one for the typical leader, because it is a diagnosis, right? Anxiety is a diagnosable state or condition. But we as leaders in business on a day-to-day basis, we aren't licensed therapists or physicians, right? We're just people trying to get our job done. So what can we do that we're capable of doing? And it's just a few simple things based on what the people who understand anxiety can tell us. First of all, we have to make it okay for people to be anxious. So what we can't have, and this happens quite a bit in people I've talked with, is that people get anxious about the fact that they're anxious. They get worried that it's not professional. They get worried that they will be showing up as something less than a fully mature adult if they talk about or in any way admit to the anxiety. That's a real problem. And that deepens the anxiety. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to put psychological safety into play in a somewhat different way, right? So psychological safety really is about creating an environment where people free to speak up. People feel free to speak up. We need to create an environment where people feel free to speak up about how they feel, right? To let it be okay to be feeling this anxiety or some depression or some sadness, depending on who you are and what language you use. So first thing is let's not let people get anxious about their anxiety. Let's make it okay to be one of those, in New Zealand at least, more than 50% of people who own some kind of anxiety about what's been going on. Second is a related one, which is something I learned actually from a leader that you and I both know, Jerry, a woman called Sylvia Burberry, who I interviewed early in the pandemic for a podcast I do. And her big lesson learned was, I just have to create space to talk to my people about how they're feeling generally. I have to stop the rush to get to the tasks. We have to talk about this project and is it moving along? We have to talk about this issue and decision and get it resolved. Yes, you do. And before you do that, you've got to stop and you've got to give people space to talk about how they're doing. It's funny, years and years ago, there was a big hurricane in the U.S., Hurricane Katrina at New Orleans. And I went down to facilitate a town hall, one of several facilitators, a town hall of 500 people. And it was devastating. The city was absolutely devastated. Lots of loss of life, real trauma. And I was at my table, and we had a lot to tackle in this town hall. This was 2 months after the event. And I was anxious and excited to get going. And I knew we had a full agenda to get through with 500 people. And I turned to one of the people who sat at my table, who I would be facilitating, an older woman who was knitting, actually. And I said, boy, I'm looking at my watch. I'm saying, this place is filling up really slowly. We need to get started. I'm worried we're not going to get through it all. And she just looked at me and very calmly said, Carlos, you have to give people time to love each other. I thought, yeah, I felt a little embarrassed, but she was absolutely right. You have to create the space for people to be human with each other. So that's the next piece of advice. With your teams, whether they're your peer teams or the teams you lead, create space for people to be okay talking about how they're doing. Now, the other problem we face is, I don't know about what it's like in New Zealand. In the US, people in business tend to have a very limited vocabulary for their feelings. They don't know how to talk about their feelings with more than a few words. Frustrated, maybe worried, concerned. But a word like anxious, people are shy to use. And I've actually been handing out a tool that gives people words to describe their feelings because they're struggling with it. And it's called the Wheel of Feelings, and it's all built on 6 or 7 essential feelings and then variations on those. It's easy to find on the web. But sometimes you have to help people not only feel okay to talk about their feelings, but give them the words to talk about them, because they literally don't do that at work. We don't get into the nuanced shades of emotion. And there's a tremendous vocabulary, at least in the English language, to describe all sorts of states of mind and feeling. So I've been sharing that with my clients, just saying, look, just on the side, nobody has to use it. Don't force anybody. Just tell them if they're thinking about talking about their feelings, here's some options.
Yeah,
and that all circles back then to making it safe. Once again, you make it safe for people to talk about whatever they come up with.
Yeah, no, that's great. Are you able to share that? If I can share that with people at the end?
I have got some examples of it. I'd have to dig it out of my files. You want me to make it available post?
Yeah, it'd be great post. If we can forward it on to people. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Let me just make some notes here, Jerry.
Yeah. I think following one thing I didn't say to people, if you've got questions, we'll be looking at questions. Just put the question in the chat box. If you see someone else's question that you really like, you can like it, and it will just move it to the top of the list. So feel free to ask you questions. So, secondly, I think companies have moved into this flexible working, or been thrown into the flexible working, and there's different companies doing different things. So some, and we'll do a poll on this in a minute. Some they've just left it to individuals to say, you choose your hours and your days. Others have taken the company view that, we're going to tell you, you're going to work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. There's actually an expression in the UK of calling people twats for working Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So quite a derogatory term, but so it's a company. We're going to tell you when to work, and outside of that, you can be flexible. I'll find out from people what they do, but and so maybe this is a good time actually to put the poll in. So Shirley, if you put the first poll in, just to see how are people doing it. Are you leaving it to your employees? Are you mandating days and times to do this, or does it vary by team or by department manager? So if you can just click on what you do and just get a sense of where people are at, that would be great. So just. We'll wait for that. We'll just give it a minute for people to choose their.
Answers are coming in quickly, Jerry.
Sorry?
Answers are coming in quickly.
Excellent. Where's it landing? I can't see the.
I'll launch it. I think we're nearly there. I'll launch the results in a moment. Yeah, I think that's. It looks like everybody come in.
It's a bit like popcorn going, isn't it? You sort of get this massive.
There it is.
It slows down. Okay, there we go. So we've got majority are either designating it from the top, if you like, or it varies by department manager or line manager. Okay. So in your experience, Carlos, what's the pros and cons with some of these different approaches in terms of leaving it to the individual and the impacts on the team of that?
I don't know of any of my clients or any of the people I talk to in my network who are living it up to their staff. Because this is a pandemic is a social phenomenon, right? It means it's about a lot of people, and almost every organization I know, for-profit, not-for-profit, large and small, is doing some level of coordination. Some are at multiple sites, some are just one site, some are big sites, some are small sites, but there is some degree of discernment and decision making around who comes in when. So I wouldn't be a fan. I think there are too many cons of just leaving it up to individuals, unless it's a really small organization where you feel you can do that safely. In terms of doing it, I think there are a few things to think about. Let's just talk about, for one moment, a large site with a concentration of people, right? So you've got 100 plus individuals at a given site. And if it's highly departmentalized, where you can give the power and authority to managers and departments to say, you're off in your wing of the building, or you're in your corner of the office, you control the comings and going, but we'll put some guidelines in place. So at no point can you have more than X number of people per the square footage you've got in your corner of the building, right? That I think that works well, because every group will be different. If you give the more autonomy you give to managers, the better, in my view. But that only works where they've got discrete spaces to work in. If you're working, as many companies do, in a large open office environment, you pretty much have to do it based on the square footage and what you feel good social distancing rules are for your organization. That takes some authority, and therefore I think some appeal away from the manager being able to make the choice. But again, it's a social thing. We have to be thinking about the mass of people and managing the numbers around that. So I think it depends. One thing I like to encourage my clients to do is to think about their culture, which will take a hit from the pandemic. There's no two ways about it. Whatever your culture was, it was based on people being in a building at the same time. Is going to be affected in some way by the pandemic. How can you reinforce those elements of your culture through the way you're recommending the return to work happen? Yeah. How can you emphasize your care for people? How can you emphasize your interest in a focus on outcomes, whatever it may be, whatever your values may be that shape your culture? Take stock of that, and at the same time, find out from your managers, those who are closest to the people, actually leading people, frontline managers, what's going to work for them and their people. Yeah, what we don't. If it was cool at the beginning of the pandemic, Gallup reported the engagement people that for the first time in 20 years, they saw the level of actively engaged employees go up for the first time in 20 years. Wow. During the pandemic. And I remember I was on Zoom with a colleague talking about this, and we both said, I'll bet you in about a year that just starts to go down as anxiety ticks up, as social separation starts to cause problems. And in fact, that's what's happening. But you want to be thinking about your managers know their people. They're the source, really, of people join companies, they leave managers, the old adage. They're attached to those managers. Managers have the greatest influence on their people. Involve them in the decision-making process. This should not be made at the C-suite level. This should not be made by vice presidents and even directors. This needs to be done with the input of people who are closest to your front line.
Yeah,
I don't know what's happening in New Zealand, but in the U.S., in the month of August, just came out today, 3% of all jobs, 3% of employees quit their jobs. 3% in the entire workforce in the U.S., right? They left because it wasn't working for them. And they figured the economy is what it is right now in the U.S. There's massive underemployment. We can't fill all the jobs we have. So people could walk out of their jobs and say, I'm going to find something else. I don't know what it's like where you are, but that reality forces us to be really mindful of where people's heads and hearts are as we prepare to come back to the office.
I don't think it's any different here. I think there's the employment's tight, especially with not letting anyone in at the border. It's probably a little bit different to the US. So we really are an island.
A little bit. You are an island, but we still have a lot of restrictions in place.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's tough. So talk to your frontline managers. Get them involved in the decision-making process. Please, please don't do this in an ivory tower.
Okay, all right. So we've got a second part, which is similar to the first, but it's really just understanding how people have got to their flexible working policy. So this is, if you like to put this one up, Shirley, that'd be great. And again, this is, has your flexible policy been designed by HR or your senior team? Has it been designed with input, from your staff? Is it a combination of one and two, or have you got no clear policy? And it's just really evolved, so it's informal. There's nothing written down or communicated to staff. It's just ad hoc. So it'd be good to get again to see where people are at on this one. So, and we'll come on to, I think, linking up, Carlos, with your point about people leaving the workforce. I think there's a good segue really onto something that's called the She Session, which you told me about, which I'd never heard about, and I've done a little bit of research about. But it's the fact that women are taking the brunt of the pandemic, if you like, in terms of.
Yes.
I'll look at this. So a combination of one and two. So more people designating it from the senior or the HR team, or a combination of the two, and some have no clear policy, which just evolved. So that's understandable because of the quickness. So I think what you're advocating, and what I think some of the research talks about is actually involving the leaders in setting some of the policy, and so that it's not just from the executive or the top team, and being more collaborative in getting there. Yeah, so in terms of women are leaving the workforce at a faster rate than men. That's one of the statistics that's out there. And women, again, this is proven fact, women are picking up more of the load than men in terms of work, schooling, and home. So, there's a lot more of a burden on them. So what should leaders be watching out for and doing about this? Obviously they can't change what they have at home, but it's going to impact them at work.
Jerry, I don't think there's any new news here. We have to go back to the first question you asked, because that women are feeling a certain amount of pressure, and it's giving rise to anxiety, burnout, frustration, and there are other issues. And let me just detail one for a second, then I'll come back to where I'm starting. Have you heard about presentism?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those folks who are showing up at the office would seem to be getting favorable treatment for being there. Not intentionally. It's just that who I see is who is top of mind for me. And so they'll tend to get the next plum promotion, or they'll get the next hot project. And that adds stress to people's lives and anxiety. So no matter where you turn, people are feeling pressure and pressured. So again, you have to create the space for people to be able to talk about this. You have to create forums for people to raise their concerns and issues. But this also speaks, I think, to flexibility. To the degree that you can grant, some employers have been monitoring people's clicks from home, right? They can tell you how much time you spent on your computer, when you were at your computer, where you were going. They were using these tracking software that can literally tell them how much time you spent at your desk. and how you're interacting, what apps you're using. If you are a mom at home, whether you're a single mom or you're a mom whose partner is working outside the house, and you're left with the schooling of your kids who can't be physically in schools, although here in the U.S. that's somewhat changing. Schools are opening. If you're that mom or you're that caregiver, you can't be tied to your computer at all times just because the company expects you to be there between 8:30 and 5 in the evening doing the things they tell you. You've got to provide the flexibility of hours, right? You've got to be able to work after the kids are in bed or work while the kids are at naps and not be held to some artificial standard of when it's the right time to be working. That's one of the ways that folks in that particularly difficult situation can manage, right? It's really tough. And as a white male who grew up with all the privileges attendant upon being that person in Western society, it's hard for me to really speak to the strains and concerns of women. I just know what I hear from my clients who are saying that's what they're struggling with. And most of the folks I'm talking to in my circles are providing that kind of flexibility throughout the course of the day. I know one woman who does most of her work. She's based in Asia, actually, in Hong Kong. She has young kids, and she has been quarantined with her kids and does most of her work at night and early in the morning because the kids are in school. They're schooling from home. They live in an apartment in Hong Kong, not the biggest apartments in the world. In Hong Kong, it's an expensive city, and real estate's dear. But she's had to find a way to make that work because she leads a team, and her team are mostly on during the day, so she doesn't get any of her personal work done until she's tended to the needs of her kids, the needs of her team, who are on, say, from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening her time, somewhere in Malaysia, somewhere in China, and elsewhere. And then after 7 in the evening and before 7 in the morning, she catches up on her emails. She works on all her projects. She does all her evaluations for her day is endless. Her day is endless. And she's a senior person. Now imagine if you weren't a senior person not getting compensated and didn't have the benefits that person did, how much harder that would be. So you got to give flexibility in time.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense. I'll pick a question here from one of the ones that so Pete Simmons has asked around. Flexibility is focused. Pete well. Flexibility is focused a lot on the individual. Being away from the office. What's your opinion or what you're seeing regarding the value of a workplace or office space and bringing people together in it? And his concern is around the conversation on flexibility doesn't focus enough on the impact on culture as well. So when the team are together.
Some interesting stuff around that. So a couple of data points. A write-up in the U.S. New York Times recently saying that people are finding they're going to the office only to spend all day on Zoom because their teams, they're alternating, right? It'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday for this piece, Tuesday, Wednesday for that piece of the team, and they end up on Zoom just in a different place, not really able to build relationships. And that come up in another article I read recently where you're bringing people together, but not all together all at the same time because those are the rules and policies. And so people aren't fostering those deep connections you foster when you work closely with somebody in proximity to them. And I'm a firm, there is no doubt, there is a massive risk to team effectiveness when teams lose that human connectivity. It's real. Zoom does not make up for it. This is true, by the way, in the sciences. I've been reading about scientists working virtually and finding they just can't reach, they're not having the same ahas. They're not reaching the same kinds of deep conversation states that they can reach when they're together. And so they're not getting to the same kinds of outcomes. So we need to find ways to get teams who are in fact interdependent, and that's the critical point here. Look, if your team is a bunch of individual contributors who don't really need each other and all you really need is the social part, that's a little more easily handled on Zoom. But if you actually need co-creation time, where we have to be together, one clever approach I've seen is actually an office that teams come in as intact teams. So the full team of, say, 8 people, right? But they have to be monitoring, right, how many people per square foot of office space. So they'll make a deal with another department and say, look, we're going to have our whole team in on this Wednesday. If you guys could just stay away, because we need the big conference room and we need the distance, and they make trade-offs across teams so that the full teams can come in and be together. It's so desperately needed for teams where high levels of interdependence and co-creation are required. You really have to find a way to do it, I think, if you're going to get back to it. Smaller teams, I've noticed, I've worked with a few teams who are 2 and 3 people. They seem to be doing okay with virtual work, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and the like. But teams that start to be 5, 6, and more people, where interactions virtually are just clumsy. Right? People are muting all the time. They're turning their cameras off. You lose the rhythm of that co-creative moment. So that's one clever solution I've seen people take to try to get their people back in the office together. Vaccination rules apply. Some are requiring masks, right? That's all fine. Make whatever accommodations you have to, but find a way to get physically proximate. Yeah.
And linking with that around, building trust, because generally a key part of being a high-performing team is you trust in your colleagues, you trust in your leader, and a lot of that trust in the past was built in person, getting to know the person, understanding their story through the social side of being in the office and catching up with people. With a lot of that now moved to virtual, and I think one of the things that people spoke to me about at the beginning of the pandemic was, our meetings are much more efficient. They're taking, they're only taking an hour. They used to take an hour and a half or 2 hours. So, I think one of the reasons is the social bit is the bit that's gone by the wayside. So, how do people, continue to build trust in teams when they're not going to be as together as much?
So this is this is sort of a hot topic for me. Trust. I can really get people a bit aggravated with my views on this. But here's something to remember about trust. It is an attribute of a high-performing team. A high-performing team has measurably higher levels of trust, whatever way you measure it. But it's not the trust that makes it a high-performing team. It's an attribute of a high-performing team, but trust is not the definition of a high-performing team. And trust is not necessarily a prerequisite to becoming a high-performing team. It's usually more of an outcome of a high-performing team. So, see, this is why I get people angry, because I'll say trust building generically is a waste of everybody's time. The way we build trust, and I've written about this fairly extensively, is by having a shared piece of work with an individual or a set of individuals that is meaningful to all of us, that feels like it has high stakes, where doing it well matters to all of us, and where we work together on it and we learn about each other through the process of working together. We learn to trust that Jerry always delivers what he says he's going to deliver. Carlos is reliable as can be, and he knows his stuff. He's competent. What I'm getting at here is one of the things you have to do is define what you mean by trust. And at Mars, we used a shorthand for that. And this is not a Mars model. It has other, called the trust equation, I think was the original formulation. But there's capability, reliability. We used transparency and motives as the other two. So how capable is a person? Do they know their stuff? How reliable are they? Do they deliver on time? Are they transparent? Do you know what's on their minds? Or do they feel like they're hiding something? And do you feel that they're motivated by doing the right thing? Look at those four things for each person and each task you're on. We found trust is very much task related. So you and I, Jerry, have known each other for years, and I'd say I trust you at a kind of a social level. But I don't know. I've never worked with you as a project manager. I may not be able to trust you as a project manager because that's not your thing. You don't have the competence or capability in that particular skill set. So I couldn't really trust you, but why would I? It's not a bad thing. It's just reality. So define what you mean by trust and have a really discrete way to define it. And then do your trust conversations around specific pieces of work. So if you and I, Jerry, we're going to contract on a piece of work, let's sit down and talk about your capability and mine. Then let's sit down virtually and talk about how do you like to schedule? Are you an on-time kind of person? Do you tend to get behind? If you are you open and transparent about that? I use those 4 elements and I have a structured conversation around it, and we make some agreements around capability, reliability, transparency, and motives. The final one being, why are you doing this? Why is this important to you? What's driving you to this? Let's be really transparent about it. It feels kind of phony, and it's not nearly as much fun as, I don't know, going on a rock climbing adventure or paintball or something like that. But it's far more effective. And when you do it in relationship to the task, it seems to stick. That contracting I've just suggested around trust seems to stick more. It feels more relevant and more important because it's about doing something together that we're both needing to get done and that we're both probably being held accountable for. So trust is a little less sexy, I think, than most people think it is. It just boils down to knowing what you mean by trust and then having the right conversations around it. And over time, a more general version of trust will develop, but it almost always starts task by task and person to person.
Okay.
So whether you're virtual or face to face.
I'll go into a little bit more on that one, because I know when you did this with our team at Mars, one of the things, the exercise we had to do was we had to talk one-on-one with our colleagues and tell them how much we trusted them on each of those 4 areas. Give them a rating out of 10. And you had to say to someone, I'll give you 8 out of 10 on reliability because, most of the time you deliver on time, but, there's been a couple of occasions where you've let me down.
Yeah.
Now that's okay face to face. Well, it's not okay. It's difficult face to face.
It's difficult, yeah.
It's not easy. And in terms of doing that, having those sorts of conversations, a lot of leaders will tend to, avoid them or softball them, in terms of, it's not that bad, or make excuses. In more of the virtual world, how should they be doing that? How
should they? I'm always careful of that word "should." I don't want to sound like I'm a parent wagging a finger, but I think here's what I can recommend. The power of self-disclosure is part of what will get you there. So before you sit down, Jerry, and say, Carlos, in terms of credibility or in terms of reliability and capability, on capability, I'm going to give you a 6. And here's what it would take to make that higher, which is, by the way, the language we use. We don't say, here's why it's a 6. We say, I'm giving you a 6, and here's what I'd like to see to get it up to an 8. So we speak in positive terms as much as possible. But before you do that, Jerry, you're going to ask me what I think of myself. So I'm going to self-disclose first. Here are the 4 items. Here's the task we have to do. And on capability, I have to be honest and say I'm maybe a 7 on this. I'm still on a learning curve when it comes to this particular discipline or thing, right? When it gets to reliability, I'm a big J in Myers-Briggs, and I am a structured person, and I keep a very tight diary, and I deliver on time. It's almost to a fault. I'm so much on time that if you're ever late, you're going to hear about it from me. So first, I self-disclose, because that gives you then permission to speak to me about whatever the topic might be. Okay? So self-disclosure is where you start. Whether you're using that framework or another one, begin by asking people, what are your strengths? Where you bring in the good stuff? And where do you think you might be struggling or need some help or need some work, whether it comes from your partner or somebody else? So that's step 1. I think in the early days of doing this kind of trust conversation, it's helpful to have a moderator or a facilitator, even if it's virtual, especially if it's virtual, so that you can keep people who are dodging saying the thing they're uncomfortable saying from saying it. And we set some ground rules, but then you've got a manager can do this, an outside facilitator can do it, but get a little help. Give people a heads up. So say, guys, we're going to do this exercise because we're trying to understand the strength of the relationships in this group. And that's usually how I talk about it. I don't talk about trust necessarily. I talk about the quality and strength of our working relationships and deepening that and making it more effective. Give people a heads up. Give them whatever model you're using in advance and say, we want you to come in and talk to us about how you're feeling on these 4 elements, your own capability, reliability, transparency, and motives. on the tasks that are important to you, and I want you to bring in 1 or 2 or 3 of these, and give people some prep time, and then let them begin with the self-disclosure. What I found is, in a virtual environment, you just have to be more structured. You have to be a bit more of a tell. You can't wait for people to chime in. You can't just let it happen. You have to provide a process and a structure for people, and then hold them. Well, hold is a bit strong. Help guide them along to make sure they stay on process. And I'll tell you what I've done in a couple of cases where people have never done anything like this before. They've never given each other feedback at all. We started with their performance assessments. So we said to all the members, that this was a fairly senior team. We said, okay, so you've had your annual review with your boss, and you've got at least one development area. And you probably have a towering strength as well, maybe even a superpower. We'd like to come together next week and talk about your superpower, towering strength, and we'd like you to talk about the development path you're on. The reason that feels safer is I've talked about it with my boss. I've gotten some feedback on it. I've already been thinking about it, right? Because it's in my development plan at work. It's in my performance management plan. And it's a little easier because it's already been discussed. That subject has been broached. People aren't necessarily comfortable talking in front of their peers about it, but it is a little easier because we all know we've all been through it with the boss. You had to get it, I had to get it, she had to get it, the person on the other side of the country had to get it. We've all had to do it. So it's a shared anxiety almost that makes it a little easier to talk about. So, and that can be an introduction to self-disclosure around places you may not be as strong as you can be. And then you can start to ramp it up from there. But for in companies where that kind of feedback is never shared, where that sort of openness about your development areas, weaknesses is not there, it's very hard to start. So structure helps, and using existing formats helps. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, no, that's good. And coming on to, in terms of high-performing teams, the clarity is one of the things you talk about, creating a clear purpose in the team. So again, that's one of the start points in terms of why, firstly, why does the team need to be together? There's many teams that come together and share stuff, and I've seen that a lot with virtual teams. They'll come in, each person will share what they're doing and then walk away. What's your view in terms of, again, building a high-performing team when you're having to use a lot of virtual, how you create that sense of purpose in the team?
Well, to me, Gary, purpose is a very specific thing within a team, right? So take a supply chain team, bunch of disciplines in that team. They all are the direct report to some supply chain leader. Okay, so the only commonality they have, they all work for the same company, they report to the same person. The team's purpose is not to do good supply chain work or to hit certain metrics. That's their job. The purpose of the team is, why must we be a collaborative body? Why is it essential that we work together in those places where our working together is absolutely necessary? Because there are probably certain things that fall within the purview of that team that can be done by capable individuals and just reported up through the lines of reporting. They don't need collaboration. They don't even need updating, but they probably, at that kind of team, you would want to keep people in the loop about what you're doing if it might affect their work. But the key is then to identify the clarity point, Jerry, is let's be clear. We don't need to collaborate on everything. In fact, there are a few articles recently coming out about over-collaboration. We don't need to collaborate on everything. We just need to figure out what work requires collaboration and then define our purpose around that. What is the value add of our collaboration? So pause for a second. Collaboration is slower, it's costlier because it's more salaries, more overheads, more prone to error, more prone to miscommunication, more prone to conflict. Collaboration is messy and complicated. Only do it if the payoff is worth it, right? So what our purpose should tell us what we will collaborate on that delivers value above just the sum of our individual efforts. Right? You can tote up the individual results and get you what you want, great, stick with that. But if you need something that's going to arise from co-creation and collaboration, that's where you define your purpose. Because that's messy and sloppy. And I like to think of it as the value add. What's the value add of our collaboration? And why is it worth the risk, trouble, time, and mess to do it? Well, because our collaboration can add this something special, can add this kind of insight, it can add this kind of creativity. Who knows, right? That's how I think about purpose. And teams are doing that brilliantly virtually. Once they frame and narrow that purpose down to what is that value equation for our collaboration, and think about it that way.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Just in terms of some of the working arrangements that have changed during COVID that have proved beneficial for teams, which ones do you think will continue post back to the office? Which ones do you think will go by the wayside?
Well, let's make a little list first. I think you've got obviously more use of technology like Zoom. So video platforms. Because prior to the pandemic, we had Slack, Teams was around. You had Blue Jeans, some of these collaboration, Trello. These are all collaboration platforms that teams were using in various ways and for various reasons. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, the video version of it, and other video platforms, I think are with us forever now. They will never replace face-to-face, but they're an indispensable tool. They're overused right now. We'll get there. I think things like Mural and Miro, are you familiar with these, Jerry?
I am, yeah.
Basically whiteboarding tools where you can create essentially an infinite whiteboard, right? And you can go from station to station on your whiteboard and do a lot of great brainstorming. Teams that are using agile methodology, right? You've got all these tools available to you in Mural and Miro in real time, but also if you're working asynchronously. I think that's here to stay. Absolutely here to stay. I think some version of hybrid working is here to stay. The jury is still out on how sustainable it is and what the right mix is, and I think the mix will vary organization to organization. But I think you can count on that. I also think that I have so many articles talking about the end of the office. Right? So all this real estate, I live right across the river from New York City, right? All the commercial real estate there that is going unused. Because people are able to get a significant amount of their work done effectively without having to go to the office. Why should companies be paying that rent? The overheads. Why incur the overheads? The overheads involved with travel. There's no way we're going back to the kind of travel spend we would see from companies like Mars and IBM, where I also worked. No way we're going back to that. That's done. We can get bang for the buck meeting on a more regular basis virtually. We can get rid of some of this real estate. I do get concerned about a real crash in the real estate market, where you're going to have to start converting office space to living space because we just don't need it anymore. I think that's going to be a big change we see. I think we're never going back to the office the way it used to be. And the final thought I have about this is COVID's not going anywhere. There may be more vaccines. There will undoubtedly be drugs that are introduced to treat it. And there's already one that's going to get emergency approval in the US for treatment of the illness. It's a bit like the atomic bomb. Once that thing was exploded, there was no putting that genie back in the bottle, right? It changed the world, and we had to learn how to live with that threat year-round, right? That level of anxiety had to adjust because it was never going away. COVID's not going away, and the various strains of it will be back. So we have to have a new way of thinking about it. We have to have a new way of accepting this threat and living with whatever it looks like and being ready to respond again, as we've all had to respond repeatedly in the past year and a half. As sad as it is, I just don't think I don't think we beat this the way we beat smallpox, for example. Right? I don't see that happening. I think we learned to live with this. And science is going to be great, but we have to rethink how we work now, because I think we live with COVID, and who knows what the next one's going to be, the next COVID.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question here from Patrick Brookman. So this is more of a general question around the tension between we need to stay safe and we need to open business, and causing stress. So given that the US is still losing around 1,900 people daily from the effects of COVID, is that tension not an issue in the US, or is the priority now leaning towards opening the economy? So where do you see the...
I'll tell you where it's playing out right now is at schools.
Yeah.
The cases of COVID that are cropping up in schools. We sent kids back to classrooms. And that was made an imperative across the U.S. States, both liberal and conservative, started saying we got to get kids back in school. They're suffering, and it's going to leave a mark, a mental and emotional damage. But all the kids are coming down with COVID. It's spreading, and teachers are. We don't have a vaccine for kids 5 to 12 yet. I think it's 12 and over. So elementary school teachers, that tension is very real, and there's no resolution. I think in terms of the workplace, that varies state to state. In the U.S., it's region by region, state by state, whether people are willing to go back and take the risks inherent in going back, or they want to play it safe. So our old employer Mars in the U.S. is playing it very safe. They are letting small numbers of people back into offices. I'm worried there's a little firm I work with up in Connecticut. It's only about a 20-person firm. They've let as many as 10 people into their small office, which is 50%. Vaccinations required, masks required, and all that sort of stuff. The tension is there. The tension persists. It has not yet gone away. I think we are leaning towards just get people back to work somehow, some way. But it's by no means a blanket policy to get people back into the office. A lot of alternating days. Our public transit is still far from its peak capacity. People just aren't going into the office.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's an ongoing saga. And there's an article I have up on my screen to my right here that says our brains weren't made to deal with this much uncertainty, that we are burning out from the levels of uncertainty and unanswered questions. And it's, gosh, I wish it were getting easier, faster. It just doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Thanks. So we're nearly at a wrap now. If anyone else has got some questions, put them in. But we've got a last poll, and it's really trying to find people what you're taking out of this webinar. So what things are you taking out that you're going to go away and action within your team? So Shirley, if you can put the last poll up, that'd be fantastic. Thanks.
Now the last poll, Jerry, because it's a free-form text, we have to do a survey rather than a poll.
Okay, right.
When people log out, the question survey will come up for them.
All right, and we can just see some of the answers as they go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you got any other questions, Liz, that you wanted to ask?
No, nothing from me, Jerry. But gosh, I made lots of notes. I think there were some really interesting, really fascinating points that Carlos talked about. Thank you so much, Carlos.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think some of the things I've taken out is the importance of just as a leader checking in on how people are feeling, within the team, one-on-one, and also within virtual meetings as well. If you can get that level of openness, and I think one of the things I've learned, and I think you've talked to this in the question around trust, is the leader actually starting some of that conversation in terms of how the leader's feeling. So if you're perfect all the time, then don't expect people to come back with sharing their vulnerabilities. So a leader actually speaking about your vulnerabilities, your doubts, you're not going to have everything perfect. And I think one of the key things is it's going to be a bit of experimentation. So especially with the ways of working.
That point, that's so important. You and I talked about that previously when we chatted. Our whole approach has got to be one of test and learn.
Yeah.
Formulate your policies, put them out there, see how they fly, get feedback, and then adjust.
Yeah.
Right? There's just no other way around it. And again, it's uncertainty, but at least it's something. We'll try this for the next 60 days. We'll check in. If we need to adjust, we'll do it.
Yeah. So getting the feelings is a key one. I think the other one I took out is, involving the leaders in some of the decisions and policies. So, don't make decisions from above. Actually find out what teams need, feedback from individuals. And as you said just there, you can try something. If it doesn't work for the business, if it doesn't work for the individuals, you can adjust. So I think nothing's permanent. That goes for the building the culture in terms of not having people all together. There needs to be some time together. So finding a way of negotiating that so that the team does come together when they need to collaborate on items is critical. We obviously talked about trust not being the outcome of a high-performing team, not being a prerequisite of a high-performing team. But obviously, one of the things high-performing teams do is have conversations around trust, so with each other, so that they're self-disclosing first, and then feeding back to each other. And then, in terms of being really clear where you need to collaborate and where you don't. So don't just have meetings that are sharing meetings. If you're bringing the team together, be clear what the purpose of bringing the team together is, so that people don't feel their time's wasted. So they were some key things I've taken out. Anything from the survey, Liz, that's coming up? I don't know. I can't see the answers.
We won't see it until people.
Oh, you don't see it. Okay. We can share that later. Yeah. So really, thank you very much, Carlos, for your time. Really appreciate it. It's into your evening on a Tuesday evening in the US.
I've got another meeting after this, so I'm carrying on.
Okay. And for everyone else who's still here, we've got another webinar this same time next week with Olivia Lund, who's from a legal perspective, and that's more around the questions around vaccinations. Vaccination passports. Can I enforce it in my workforce? What's my legal responsibility looking after people when they're working at home? So there'll be a number of questions that you may have there. Please sign up for that webinar, and she'll be able to answer and help you through some of that risk assessment that you may need to do in terms of the decisions you're going to have to make. The other thing is, if there's any other general health and safety queries, questions, Liz and the team at ShopCare are always there to go to. You can go through the website, you can go through LinkedIn, or you can just contact either myself or Liz or any of the team anytime you like around any things you're struggling with. Or if you've got great practices you want to share with others as well, we can amplify that. So any last words from you, Carlos, before we finish?
No, I don't think so. I think we're all going through this together. I guess I have a wish for everybody, and that is stop and breathe every so often. And do yourself the favor of just collecting your thoughts, get a little quiet time to recharge your batteries. We probably got months still of dealing with this, if not years, and I just want us all to take care of ourselves, not just in terms of staying safe from viruses, but your mental and emotional health is so important and so much at risk. So do take care.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carlos. Really appreciate your time, and good luck and stay safe.
Thank you. Same to all of you. Be well.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your participation and questions. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Bye-bye.